I'm Kalila.
And I'm Bonny.
And our film explores the beauty that comes after the forest fire.
We examined different forests where fires had occurred and found new life that can grow out of burn scars.
It's commonly thought of that forest fires are destructive, which they can be, but we took the time to find the positives that come after a forest fire.
We hope that our video inspires viewers and spreads awareness about the beauty that can come after a forest fire.
Fire is sort of like precipitation. It can come in all shapes and sizes, and it can come at different times of the year, and it can come in different volumes and different intensities. And depending on the kind of forest you're talking about, and depending on where you're at in the world, a lot of the species, both the plants and the animals, have evolved to not only deal with, but actually encourage and need fire to behave in certain sorts of ways. Historically, a lot of our forests were evolved to really want and need what we call low severity surface fire. That's fire that's usually started by a lightning strike and creeps along the ground. And that's the kind of fire that maintains balance in that ecosystem, maintains a balance of types of plants, maintains the kinds of food that's available not just for mammals, but also insects and birds and everything in between. Ponderosa pine in particular is a great recorder of fire. It's a species that's really resistant to fire. It can burn and be scarred and keep living. And so we have hundreds of samples across northern New Mexico of ponderosa pines that have repeated scars from fires. And those trees are the icons of what a healthy forest system should look like. Because again, those fires, the surface fires that burn with low severity, are what kept the forest floor open, allowed grasses to grow in, and prevented a buildup of fuels that would supercharge fires in a lot of different ways. Aspen is another good indicator of areas where fire was playing its role on the landscape, usually at higher elevations. You know, we're saying 9,000 to 11,000 feet is kind of that sweet spot. At that elevation and in that forest type, wildfire historically, well before humans were getting involved, would burn every 200 years, 300 years, and it would burn really hot. What comes in after those really hot, really intense fires that tend to burn and kill most things are resprouters like aspen. Aspen are clonal, and after a fire, their shoots pop up, often within the same season that the fire happened, and they become the dominant tree species on those sites, sometimes for decades or even centuries. What we think of as beautiful, especially beautiful after a fire, is very much in the eye of the beholder. Wildfire for so long hasn't been part of our culture, it hasn't been part of our society, and it's been demonized in a lot of ways for decades or over a century as this evil thing that destroys. It's easy to understand that when you drive through an area that's been recently burned and you see charred tree stumps, or you might see trees that are completely torched out. You see ash often inches deep on the forest floor where there were grasses and flowers and smaller trees and shrubs. Our perception of that is that it's ugly. And I think what we need to do as a culture and as a society, especially as we move into an era where disturbances like fire are changing rapidly, is to recalibrate our notion of what's ugly and what's beautiful. What's beautiful about fire is a cleansing process. There are opportunities for species that weren't in those landscapes before to now find a new toehold and to create biodiversity across the landscape. And biodiversity is critical because it creates balance in these systems, habitat that didn't exist before, a diversity of vegetation types in order to acclimate to changes without wholesale loss of the forest. And even in our understanding of what's beautiful now, if you go walk areas of the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon Scar this year, 12 months after that fire caused so much destruction and devastation on that side of the hill, it's just nothing but abundant wildflowers, resprouting aspens. There's a ton of wildlife in there. There is beauty in that change and there's beauty in that disturbance. It just requires us to think differently about what these systems need in terms of change, and to be able to accept that change without just assuming that everything is lost and that it's the end of the world. These disturbances are going to happen. We have some control over the way that happens. We don't have a lot of control over most of it. And so it's going to be in our perception of this change and our attitudes about what's beautiful that's going to make it easier to accept that change.